You know, every once in a while you hear about someone who's just larger than life. The kind of person who seems so strong, so confident. You'd think they were basically invincible. Well, today we're telling the story of a man exactly like that. His name was Bert Crunch, and this is the story of the journey that pushed his legendary strength right to the absolute limit. His story starts with a birth that was just as wild as the man himself. I mean, picture this, a crazy blizzard, wind just howling, and right in the middle of it all, on the back of a dog sled, Bertr Crunch enters the world. He was practically born from the wilderness, you know? It was in his blood from his very first breath. And in his little Alaskan town, where pretty much everyone knew everyone, Bertr Crunch, oh, he stood out, literally. At 6'6", he wasn't just a tall guy. He was a walking landmark. The man cast a long shadow over the whole town. I mean, just get a load of this. We're talking braided hair down his back, a braided beard to match, biceps that looked like they had their own biceps, tattoos all over telling stories of his insane adventures. This guy didn't ski down mountains. No, he skied up them. And the biggest rumor? That he'd won the Iditarod, the single toughest sled race on Earth, without a single dog. So what do you do next when you're already a living legend? For Bertra, the answer was pretty simple. Take on the Yukon in the dead of winter. And you know what? To the people in his town, this wasn't even surprising. It was just Bertra being Bertra. The entire town actually came out to see him off. They were his biggest fans, passing around hot chocolate and holding up this banner. It said, Bert, he's our dude. If he can't beat the Yukon, that's very rude. For them, there was no question he'd succeed. It was just a matter of when he'd be back. And with that, he was off. Just one person walking against this huge blank canvas of white. That giant of a man just got smaller and smaller until all 6'6" of him was just a tiny little speck swallowed up by the endless frozen tundra. And then he was gone. So the Yukon. We're talking about a massive, desolate wilderness up in northern Canada. And when it gets cold there, it gets really cold. It can become the coldest place on the entire continent, with temperatures dropping to a mind-numbing negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It's so cold that if you threw a cup of boiling water in the air, it just flash freeze into a cloud of snow. After a while, walking through all that swirling snow, Bert spotted something, a faint glimmer of warmth in the distance. It was a small group of huts with steam rising up from the ground all around them. He'd found Sulfur Springs, this tiny little outpost built right on top of volcanic hot springs, a little pocket of life in a completely frozen world. And that's where he met the only other person for miles, a guy they called Yukon Pete. The two of them couldn't have been more different. You had Bert, this towering, powerful man, just overflowing with confidence. And then there was Pete, leathery, old, and full of experience. His face looked like a roadmap of a life spent not looking for adventure, but just plain surviving it. Pete didn't have to say a whole lot to prove he knew what he was talking about. He just said, I know the North like the back of my frostbitten hand. And then he actually showed Bertram what he meant. He pulled off his glove and Bertram saw it. Pete was missing half of his pinky finger, a little souvenir from the cold. But Bert, he's a showman. He wasn't going to be one-upped. He started telling his own stories, each one bigger than the last, until he dropped this gem. I once surfed down an avalanche with a moose strapped to each foot for skis, but I've never seen the Yukon in winter. See, for him, this wasn't just a hike. It was another notch on his belt. Pete's face got real serious then. He looked Bert straight in the eye and said, But Bert, you don't know the Yukon in the winter. It's different. It was a simple thing to say, but it was packed with a lifetime of hard-earned respect for the wilderness. A respect that Bert, in all his confidence, just couldn't quite grasp yet. Pete must have realized that there was no talking Bert out of this, so he did the next best thing. He tried to give him a fighting chance. He handed him a map to a hunting camp about 10 miles away, gave him one last warning, and then offered him his most trusted friend, his best dog, Seuss. At first, the going was pretty easy, but then just whoosh, out of nowhere, the world just vanished. The wind started screaming and a solid wall of white came down. It was so thick, Bert literally couldn't see his own hand right in front of his face. He was completely blind. In all that chaos, one thing was clear. Seuss, the dog, knew the way back. He was tugging on the leash, pulling Bert back toward the warmth and safety of Sulfur Springs. So Bert had a choice to make, right then and there. Trust the dog's instincts or trust his own ego? What do you think he did? He chose his ego. He unclipped the leash, let Seuss go, and pushed forward alone. He was going to beat this storm no matter what. And in that exact moment of defiance, it was like the Yukon answered back. There was a huge, sickening crack, and the ground just disappeared from under him. He'd fallen through the ice into a freezing creek. The shock of that cold was just agonizing. He managed to drag himself out, but the damage was done. His soaking wet pants were already starting to freeze solid. His legs were turning into popsicles. He knew he was in a race against time. He had to build a fire, and he had to do it now. His hands were so numb he could barely feel them. He described his fingers as feeling like meat on a stick. But with what little he had left, he arranged some twigs into a little teepee. He fumbled with his lighter, his fingers just not cooperating. He struck it again and again. And then, sparks. A tiny flame. And a little wisp of smoke. He did it. He had a tiny, fragile fire going. He huddled over that little flame, trying to coax it to life. It was his one beacon of hope. But then, the absolute worst thing happened. He'd built the fire right under a tree heavy with snow. A whole blizzard's worth of snow fell from the branches above right onto his fire. And just poof. It was gone. It was a rookie mistake, a fatal error born from pure desperation. And in that moment, it all hit him. He should have respected the Yukon, not just expected to triumph over it. He tried to run to get his blood flowing. But his legs were frozen solid. He fell, got up, fell again, until he just couldn't get up anymore. He was just starting to drift off into the snow when a face swam into his vision. It was the gap-toothed grin of Yukon Pete. He was alive. Seuss, the dog he'd sent away, had run all the way back to get help, and Pete had found him, just in time. Sometime later, the two men sat together in one of the hot springs. The water was a steaming 110 degrees, while the air outside was a crisp -30. They just sat there in the silence, surrounded by a cloud of steam, a whole different world from the brutal cold just a few feet away. As they sat there, a single, perfectly formed snowflake drifted down out of the sky. It landed on the surface of the hot water. For just a second, it was this beautiful, intricate thing, and then it just melted, gone in an instant. And watching it disappear, Bertrand saw a little bit of himself in that snowflake. And then, very quietly, he said it. I'll never underestimate nature again. I don't care how strong you are. No one's stronger than nature. As the northern lights started to dance across the sky, Bertr Crunch, the man who set out to conquer the wild, finally understood. The greatest strength isn't about beating nature, but about respecting it.